Hello there, and welcome to the Dear Dyslexic podcast series, brought to you by Rethink Dyslexia, the podcast where we're breaking barriers and doing things differently. I'm Shay Wissell, your host, and I'm so glad you can join us. I'm a fellow neurodivergent, and I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I live and work. And I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to all the tribes across our beautiful country, and to all First Nations people listening today. Our podcast was born in 2017 out of a need to give a voice to the stories and perspectives of adults with dyslexia. And our voice has grown stronger year after year. We're now a globally listened to podcast with guests from all around the world. Join us for insightful conversations about living with dyslexia and other neurodivergences across all walks of life. Our special focus is on adult education, employment, social and emotional wellbeing, and entrepreneurship. We're excited to be bringing you this episode and invite you to like and follow us, or even better, why not leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dear Dyslexic podcast show. And today I am thrilled to have on Dr. Erin Lalor, who's the CEO of the Alcohol and Drug Foundation, and was also my second manager out of university at the Stroke Foundation. So welcome to the show, Erin.
Good to see you, Shay.
I'm thrilled to have you on the show because you were the first manager into my career that I disclosed that I had dyslexia. And that was a very traumatizing time for me, but I was so well supported by you and the Stroke Foundation. And particularly because it was at a time when it wasn't really spoken about. We're talking, a long time ago now, over 15 years ago probably. And I think part of the reason I felt comfortable disclosing to you was because you had a background in speech pathology, which made me feel like you would have a bit more understanding than other managers that I had spoken to before. So I'm really happy to be able to talk about neurodivergence with you today and to unpack a little bit more around neurodivergence and alcohol and other drug use, particularly around dyslexia, because we don't often talk about it. But before we dive into our exciting conversation, could you please just tell us a little bit about yourself and the Alcohol and Other Drug Foundation and the acronym for it?
So, of course, because the Alcohol and Drug Foundation is a bit of a mouthful, we also refer to ourselves as the ADF, which can be a bit confusing because people often confuse us with the Australian Defence Force, and we are not the same. But the ADF has been around for over 60 years. We were started by Sir Weary Dunlop when he came back from the war and observed a number of returned soldiers who were really struggling with alcohol. And he felt that there just weren't the supports for people who were needing to be able to get treatment for their alcohol dependence. And he started our organisation in response to that. And over the years, the substances that were being used by people in the community were changing. And we saw that also in the returned soldiers group, where after Vietnam, we saw many coming back with heroin use and needing support for that use. And so we've evolved as an organisation in response to the changing needs that happen within the community. Our name has changed many times over that period of time. And it's now that we are operating under the term Alcohol and Drug Foundation that we are really starting to focus on what we can do to prevent and minimise the harms from alcohol and other drugs in the Australian community. So our mission is to inspire really positive change and deliver evidence-based approaches that prevent and reduce harms from alcohol and drugs. And that includes illicit drugs as well as pharmaceutical medications that might be used off script by people. We see significant harms from those sorts of drugs as well. And we focus most of our efforts on prevention. So we run two very large prevention programs in Australia. One of them is the Good Sports program, which is delivered into about 13,000 community sporting clubs across Australia. It's one of the biggest prevention programs of its kind in the world. And we support community sporting clubs to build culture and approaches that really reduce the likelihood that their members will experience harms from alcohol as our most commonly used substance, but also from other drugs. And what we see is that there's really good evidence that the Good Sports program reduces risky drinking in the membership. It reduces alcohol-related harms. and they see more members joining. So particularly women and children are more likely to join the clubs that are good sports clubs. And the other really large prevention program that we run is the Local Drug Action Team program, or the LDAT program, and that operates in about 270 communities across Australia, where we support local teams to undertake activities to address the local issues that they're seeing from alcohol and drugs in their communities. But one of the biggest programs that's perhaps of most interest to your listeners is the drug information program that we provide, and the Path to Help service, which connects people to help and support. And there is a huge need for people in Australia for information about alcohol and drugs, about their effects, about the risks associated with taking them, about what you can do to reduce your harm, and how you can get access to help and support if you or someone that you care about needs. Alcohol and drugs are a very real part of our community. About 75% of Australian adults use alcohol. About 1 in 2 Australians adults have used an illicit drug in their lifetime. And we see really significant harm from all substances when they're used at high risk levels. So alcohol is related to injuries, to cancers, to other chronic diseases. There's overdose risk of criminalisation because of the illicit nature of illicit drugs. So the work that we do is very strongly grounded in evidence, very focused on prevention. We reach millions of Australians every year through our programs, really making sure that we can do everything we can to help people avoid the harms associated with substance use, recognising that substance use is a very real part of the world that we all live in.
Yes, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, and it's really fascinating to hear the history and how it was first established, your service and the support you're doing. It's huge what the work you're doing at the moment. And I think for me, I often talk about when I present, I had my first and hopefully ever mental health crisis after I was diagnosed with dyslexia and dysgraphia. And part of that was too much recreational drug use at the time. And it's not something I talk about a lot, even though it's in my book. But I think part of that is attached to that stigma and shame. But as we've grown in this organisation and the work we do and the research we're seeing with other neurodivergent conditions, we know that risk-taking behaviours and the use of alcohol and other drugs to help us manage our neurodivergence or to hide it is a real thing in our community, which is why I wanted to talk to you about it today, partly to share, I guess, a bit more of my experience around alcohol and other drugs and the path it took me down, which wasn't pleasant for me or my family, but also starting to have these conversations so people can get the support they need if they think that maybe it's time to get some help, or what does that even look like in getting help?
Yeah, and I think, you reflected at the beginning of our conversation about the fact that I was one of the first managers that you disclosed your dyslexia to. And I think people who are experiencing neurodivergence and substance use are often affected by two types of stigma. So drug use is, the World Health Organization recognises illicit drug use as probably the most stigmatised health condition globally, which has a lot to do with the fact that governments have criminalised drug use. And so people hide their drug use, which can really delay our ability to be able to provide help when it's needed. And then the fact that for many people who are diagnosed or undiagnosed with a neurodivergent condition, there's also the challenge in talking about that. And I think that's changed a lot. You've talked about the changes that you've seen within the community over the years, but it does make it more challenging for people who have been diagnosed with a neurodivergent condition to be able to probably seek help for their substance use if they need it.
And I think also our tendency to, I think within the ADHD community, that dopamine hit, that bit of fun, that on-the-spot decision making that sometimes isn't the right decision at the time. But so we have some traits that can lean us towards some of those behaviours anyway. And I think that through your work, have you seen much around that risk-taking behaviour? I know there's not a lot of research around dyslexia, but I know there's resources around ADHD and autism. What are some of the key things that work has seen?
Yeah,
Is that risk-taking behaviour and a bit of fun?
I think so. You describe risk-taking behaviour and a bit of fun, and that's a very human behaviour. And it's why alcohol and other drug use is so incredibly complex, because the reasons that people use alcohol and drugs, the way in which they use them, the substances they choose to use, are all unique to that particular individual. And we see substance use initiated and used most commonly amongst younger people, sort of the 18 to 30-year-old age group. And there are some cohorts within that who are using drugs more often than other people. But it's that age group where that risk-taking behaviour, that search for connectivity, exploration all starts to happen. And what we do know is that neurodivergent people may be at higher risk of substance use harms, particularly if their condition is undiagnosed or unsupported. And they face challenges like social exclusion and co-occurring mental health issues, which can just create an environment where harm from alcohol and drugs is more likely. So for some people, it might be using substances as managing emotional distress or social pressures, or providing short-term relief, helping them feel more regulated. Or many people who are neurodivergent say substances can help them cope with just everyday activities in their world. But if we look at ADHD and AOD use, there's probably been the most research in that group of people. And there was one very large study that compared adults with ADHD to those without, and found that they were around 1.5 times more likely to experience nicotine dependence, 2.5 times more likely to experience polydrug dependence, and 4 times more likely to experience alcohol dependence. And then a separate study estimated that about 1 in 5 people who've been diagnosed with a substance use disorder also have ADHD. And I think you've picked it up. The impulsivity that some people with ADHD experience can lead them to experiment with alcohol and other drug use, particularly in that age group where lots of their peers are also experimenting. And they talk to us about the fact that substances can provide short-term relief from the symptoms and impacts of untreated ADHD, so restlessness and negative emotions, depression, anxiety, challenges with sleeping and racing thoughts. And as I said, it sometimes helps them just being able to focus enough to be able to get through the activities that they need to complete in their everyday life. And if we look at autism and AOD, in some cases, the protective traits that are associated with autism, such as low sensation-seeking tendencies, can reduce the likelihood of substance use or dependence on alcohol or other drugs. Whereas some people with autism who use alcohol have said, and other drugs have said, that it helps with autism-related symptoms like sensory overload, mental health symptoms like feeling stressed or having negative thoughts, physical problems like sleeping, pain, and social situations. So it really helps them to try and connect with other people or wanting to feel a sense of belonging. But I think one of the things that's really important for people to remember is that, as with non-neurodivergent people and neurodivergent people, there are common reasons that increase the likelihood of, 1, wanting to use substances, and 2, being at risk of harm. And that can include things like a family history of substance dependence or high levels of use in your peer groups or your family. Trauma is a really big part of increased risk of harm from substance use. Being diagnosed later in life, having very few social supports, being unemployed, disconnected from community. These are all things that, irrespective of who you are or your background, they really do increase your risks of experiencing harm. And the flip of that is that there are many people who use substances, alcohol and other drugs, whether it's heroin or MDMA or cocaine or methamphetamine, who don't experience significant harm from their drug use. They don't experience dependence. It is they use for a period of time and find that it can provide value in their everyday activities. So the work that we do is really a careful balance between not wanting to stigmatise drug use, because for some people it adds value, but also helping people understand what they need to be looking out for to make sure that they're not likely to develop a dependence or experience harm that impacts on not only on them, but as you've said yourself, Shay, impacts on your family and the people around you.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important kind of conversation to have, looking at like the whole population and then kind of the risk factors that us as neurodivergent people can have. And I really hope in time we can look at implications for dyslexia, because I feel like it's a mix of all of those things as well. And it's particularly because there's such a high correlation between dyslexia and ADHD. But I think some of that stigma and shame and stress and cognitive overload could be some of the reasons why we tend to use alcohol and other drugs. And just to escape the normality and to feel normal, probably to escape feeling not normal, to feel normal like everyone else, where you're not different for a time. But it's interesting that you say that, the people can use it without it becoming a dependency. But I guess for neurodivergent people, we're at a greater risk of that happening because of the confounding factors around being neurodivergent and the societal structures that we're trying to manage day to day. At Rethink Dyslexia, we are doing things differently. As a global leader in creating inclusive environments for adults with dyslexia, our commitment is to provide individuals with opportunities to live healthier, happier, and more connected lives. Through our range of tailored services, including coaching, learning and development programs, consultancy, and training, we're helping dyslexic individuals, businesses, and organisations to better understand and support their dyslexic employees. So if you're looking for insights, inspiration, and expert advice on dyslexia and how you can provide inclusive practices and environments, then head to rethinkdyslexia.com to find out more, or book your free consultation today.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, that it is knowing that for neurodivergent people, there is an increased risk of dependence as well as an increased likelihood of using substances. And I think you're spot on when you talk about your observations for people with dyslexia, that the emotional difficulties, low self-esteem, challenges often in peer relationships, entry into the workforce, life transitions become a bit harder. And they are all risk factors for increasing the risk and likelihood of AOD harm. And there just isn't a lot of research when it comes to dyslexia. And what research has been done has had really mixed results. Some report lower substance use, particularly among undergraduate students with dyslexia, while others report higher use amongst some populations of people with dyslexia in disadvantaged groups. So there is a lot that's unknown in the context of dyslexia, but you're pointing out that just the world that you live in increases the risk is really important to bear in mind.
And it's interesting because like if someone's unemployed, they're at greater risk of substance use. And then if you look at the neurodivergent population, we're at greater risk for some of those social determinants that you were talking about anyway. So then it starts to become this complex layer of multiple risk factors that can impact on us as we progress into adulthood and into, adulthood, which is challenging when you don't have your parents anymore.
Yeah.
Or a network around you.
Yeah, spot on. And it's why understanding the risks, understanding how to spot the signs of increasing use or problematic use, understanding how to talk about your use with people, finding the right people to talk to about your substance use so that you feel supported in that learning period of adjusting to the neurodivergent condition as you transition through life, but also introducing substance use into that transition period as well.
So are there any misconceptions around drug use or challenges? And I think probably a lack of understanding that 1 in 2 people have tried some type of illicit drug, and that not everyone's going to become dependent, I think is a really important point as well. But there are some misconceptions that you think might be harmful in people seeking support?
So many misconceptions in the illicit drug space and the alcohol space, to be fair. I mean, alcohol is our most commonly used drug in Australia. People don't think of it as a drug. It's a drug. It's used by most adults in the country. It contributes the most harm, apart from nicotine and smoking. It is our most harmful substance. And many people are living with chronic disease or have been injured because of alcohol use. So I think that's one of the misperceptions is we think illicit drugs are the bad drugs. That's where all the harm is. And actually it's not. Alcohol is our most harmful drug. I think some of the other misperceptions you've touched on, that not everyone who uses drugs becomes dependent. Not everyone who uses drugs finds that they are a negative in their life. And overcoming that misconception is really important in reducing. And then stigma leads to those negative stereotypes, So the media, when they talk about drug use in particular, they will talk about a particular view of people who use drugs, and it is so stigmatising to people who use drugs to present that view. There's a broad range of Australians who use drugs, from lawyers to mechanics to people who work in offices. It's not a particular segment of the Australian community who use drugs, and they're not bad people who use drugs. So I think it's really important to understand that all sorts of people use drugs for all sorts of reasons, and it's not always harmful. One of the other misperceptions that we combat constantly is that, you can just say no, that if you have developed a problem with drug use, it's your own fault. You should just say no. Why can't you do something about it? And it's absolutely not the case that it's as simple as just saying no. And it's why we don't support that approach with children. It's accepting that some people will use substances. Many children and young adults will use alcohol. It's having a conversation that acknowledges that use and helps them reduce the harms from that use, rather than thinking that you can just turn it off if you wanted to. There's lots of misperceptions around blame. As I said, that if you have a problem with substance use, that's your own fault. It's generally for reasons that are incredibly complex, often out of someone's control. Trauma has a huge part to play in substance use disorders globally. The criminalisation of drug use isn't helping us get people into help because they hide that behaviour. And then I think the other thing that we really get people to focus on is that when you watch television or you look at drug use in the media, you see people who are using substances as going straight to rehab. So when you only have a problem with your substance use when you need to go to rehab. And actually, problematic substance use develops over a long period of time. Some of the studies say that it's 18 years from when someone develops problematic use with substances to when they look for help. And over that period,
Wow.
things unravel. So understanding that starting early, if you're seeing harmful use or problematic use, is really critical in ensuring that you have, one, the best outcome so that you don't need treatment, and two, that you may not need to stop. So there's often a view that abstinence is the only approach for someone who's got a substance use disorder, but for many people, they will find a level of substance use where they're not experiencing significant harm. So getting in early, starting early, counselling, self-management. For some people who are starting to use alcohol at risky levels, it's as simple, as introducing a couple of alcohol-free days a week and starting later in the day so you drink less are some really easy tips that you can introduce early before you actually need to be going in for treatment. So I think
sorry, Erin.
I was just going to say they're the things that get in the way of people getting good outcomes.
What is an indicator that it might be becoming problematic? Is it that we notice we're having 2 or 3 glasses of wine a night? Is it noticing that we're drinking every night, or that we seem to drink a lot on the weekends? Like when should we start to think, this might be more than just the occasional drink and I didn't realize, like eating a bag of chocolate every night.
Yeah, and it happens slowly, so you don't go from drinking a glass of wine once a week to suddenly having a problem. Behaviours change over a period of time, which is why they're a bit tricky sometimes to address. But if you're drinking or using substances more frequently, more of them, starting earlier in the day, hiding the behaviour, doing it where it's not with others, it's not in that social setting so your reasons for using it and places of use might change, where you might have been drinking with friends and now you drink on your own. During COVID, during lockdowns, we saw a lot of people really, because it was so acute, they had an ability to be able to see that behaviour change much more frequently. And there was a lot of conversation about people who started to drink every day. They'd shut down their computer and they'd start drinking at 5 o'clock, whereas before COVID, they might not have had a drink until dinner time at 7, and they only did it on Fridays, Saturdays, and that was it. So it's how often, how much, how early, where you're doing it, whether you're hiding it, whether it starts to interfere with your mood, changes to appetite, your energy levels, your ability to be able to just do the things that you do, get to work, manage your finances, see your friends. They're all signals that there is a change. And as soon as you see them, we really encourage people to think about what they can do to just lower the amount or the time in which they are relying on substances. And if they find that hard to do, to talk to the general practitioner or talk to a friend or jump on our website, connect into peer groups. There's some great online groups like Hello Sunday Morning, Sober in the Country, Smart Recovery. They're all groups where there are other people who are also trying to do something about their substance use, who can be great support in a really anonymous way.
I used to love a good drink. And I think the more we've heard, the connection with cancer and alcohol has really impacted me, because my mum died so young from cancer and she liked to have a drink as well. But we've always had, my husband and I have always had an agreement, we don't drink Monday, Tuesday at least. And as I'm getting older, for me, that's pushing out now to the weekends. But I would have used to have a drink maybe every night when I was younger. And I think for me, being pregnant during COVID was a saving grace, because I know that I would have been having a lot more to drink. Well, clearly, because I was pregnant, I wasn't drinking at all. And then I was breastfeeding. So that for me was a really strong catalyst, thank goodness, for not drinking, because I could see what was happening in our community. And I know that I would have been participating and having drinks like that as well. And so, but it's really hard, because it's a culture that we are indoctrinated in from early teenage years.
Yeah, we do. Alcohol is a big part of the Australian culture, and we see really preventable and dreadful harms from alcohol. The fact that many people don't recognise that alcohol is a carcinogen at the same level that asbestos and tobacco are. Its links to cancer are very well demonstrated and proven, particularly breast cancer. And yet our brains just don't want to accept that information because of all the marketing that happens around us that makes it so different from that view. And I think the alcohol industry is very much a part of that problem, because marketing a product is a commercial interest, and it's why we see alcohol as a commercial determinant. There are commercial interests behind that particular substance that allows it to be promoted and accessible and cheap for people, making it really easy to get. But you talked about your husband and you sort of having that commitment of not to drink on Monday and Tuesday night. And it's such a great solution or strategy to find people. What others do around us is a really big part of how we use substances. And so if you can have common behaviours around substance use, it can reduce your risk as well.
Yes, and it does help. I think I've noticed in my network, and because probably we're getting older as well, we don't go out as much, but it's not so much let's have a drink. It might be let's go and have breakfast or lunch or do something that doesn't always revolve around alcohol, which is a nice change.
Very
doing
much.
other things.
Yes.
It is a nice change, but I do like a good gin still. we've talked a bit about strategies and the science, which I think is really helpful because sometimes we don't realize it creeping up on us. And that was really interesting. You said over 18 years. Like, that's a long time.
It is a long time. And there are a couple of reasons people wait so long. One is that misperception that if you aren't experiencing a sort of movie style addiction where you're having really big violent outbursts and you're throwing things, or you're still holding down a job and you're not needing a drink early in the morning, that you don't have a problem with substances. And that's absolutely not the case. For many people, they creep up over time, and you delay until it gets to that point, and then it's really hard to do something about it. So that's one of the big barriers to people getting help early. And the other is stigma. People just too embarrassed. We talk to people who use substances who need help, as well as their family and friends, and everyone says, I'm too embarrassed to look for help. I don't want people to know I've got a problem. And if they do, they want to stay anonymous. And until we can overcome stigma and allow us to have open conversations about substance use and dependence, it's going to be hard for people to overcome that embarrassment and that desire for anonymity.
Which is really why it's so fantastic to have this conversation with you, because you've got the complexity of being neurodivergent and that embarrassment or stigma or shame attached to not being normal, in inverted commas, and fitting in, whether it's reading, writing, or sitting still or socializing. And then you've got the overlay of then feeling the shame and stigma around using drugs and alcohol if that's becoming a problem for someone. So I think it's really important because we're not really having these conversations. And that was really exciting to see your resources on ADHD and autism in this space, and that at least those conversations are happening, and to have the opportunity for you to kind of broaden it out and to start to reflect on people with dyslexia and the broader strategies that we could all be using is really, really helpful.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing is just thinking about it from the perspective of family and friends, people who are using substances, because they're often the ones who try to get help for someone, and knowing what they can do is really important. Open, honest conversations, no judgment, offering help but not insisting on help. But I think the other thing is thinking about parents, particularly for kids who are diagnosed with neurodivergent conditions, because often in Australia, parents will give kids alcohol because they think it's helpful. They're getting them ready to be able to use alcohol as adults. But actually, all the evidence tells us that the earlier a child uses alcohol, the more likely they are to develop a problem with it in later life. And given the additional risk for people who are neurodivergent, being aware of trying to just keep their future bright, keep their options open, not introducing them to alcohol early, not encouraging them to drink, encouraging them not to drink, and focus on the good, fun things you can do as families that you've sort of alluded to. Really important, I think, for parents to recognise that the value they can bring by not bringing alcohol into the picture for kids until as late as they can, and certainly not before they're 18.
Yes, that's such an important point, because I can only assume the trauma that my mum went through in trying to find alcohol and other drug support, rehab, clinic help when I was in hospital, and the trauma my whole family had to sit through as we went through family therapy to unpack why this had happened, and having to live with my mum, and she would have to keep all the medications locked away. Like, I can, as a parent now, I can imagine like how traumatic that was for her, for my brothers, for my dad and sister as well. So that's what we don't want families have to go through, whether it's a partner or a child or a friend.
I want anyone to have to go through it. And it is, people who need treatment often struggle to get it. They get it late. They need it. It's not a automatic fix. It's like any chronic illness. It takes time. You can't expect to just go and see someone and the problem's gone away. So patience and understanding complexity are all really important. But we urge people to just If you think you're starting to develop a problem, don't wait because you think it's not enough of a problem. Implement some simple strategies, connect with others, do all those sorts of things. And if you're a parent, have the open conversation with people that's not judgmental to see whether you can get them to think about modifying that behaviour before it really does become problematic. And there are tools on our website for family and friends and parents to help them have those conversations. There's Path to Help on our website, which is a navigation tool that people can use to help them find services that might be suitable for themselves or someone they care about. We've launched earlier this year a new chatbot called DIB, which people can interact with to get information about alcohol and drugs as well. So there's lots of information available. It's just making sure that you access it, and if you've got more questions, you ask those questions.
Well, I think having you on the show to have these conversations where we're trying to reduce the stigma, I think is really, really powerful. And I'm really grateful for you spending the time, because I know how busy you are, but to help us unpack this, because it's a really important topic that's not being talked about enough. And I'm really excited that we can be here having it, even though I was a bit nervous sharing some of the stuff that's happened to me. But if people aren't talking about it, then you feel like you're alone. And we don't want people feeling alone.
Yeah, well, my hat off to you, Shay, because it's courageous to talk about things that people don't want to talk about. And yet the more we have conversations like this one, the more people will feel able to have conversations like this one. And they will transform lives, these sorts of conversations.
Well, the work you're doing is transforming lives. And I'm just really appreciative of you coming on the show, and I still visualize the day I sat in your office and talked to you about my dyslexia. And, it's moments like that are life-changing, like these conversations. And so just thank you so much, Erin, for being part of my life for all these years and for coming on and talking about such an important topic, and for the resources you've been developing in this space for neurodivergence. And I hope in time we can create something and we gather more research around dyslexia as well, because they're all interconnected and it's a really important topic. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Shay.
And for everyone listening, we'll have a whole list of resources on the website and further information. And Hello Sunday is a fantastic app that I've used before in the past as well. So we'll put some resources and links to all those different tools that Erin spoke about. So thank you again, Erin, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Shay. You too.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening. If you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up to our mailing list so you can keep up to date with everything we are doing at Rethink Dyslexia. So head to rethinkdyslexia.com.au. And don't forget, if there's anything you heard today that was distressing, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.